5 American wars. 5 families got rich from every single one. Not speculation, government contracts. Let me show you the pattern that's made the same dynasties billions while millions died. There's a business model in American history that's more profitable than oil, more consistent than banking, more protected than any monopoly. It's made the same families wealthy for 6 generations, created dynasties that control billions in assets, funded political careers, university endowments, and charitable foundations. And it's built on a simple premise: profit from war, every war, any war. The roster reads like an American aristocracy, but their fortunes weren't built on invention or innovation. They were built on contracts signed when young men were being sent to die. The DuPont dynasty. For 220 years, every time America went to war, DuPont supplied the explosives. Revolutionary War, Civil War, both world wars, Vietnam, Iraq. Same family, same product, different century. Standard Oil and the Rockefellers. When militaries transitioned from coal to petroleum, one family controlled 90% of America's refining capacity. Every tank, every ship, every aircraft needed their fuel. They sold to both sides and called it business. The Morgan banking empire. Wars cost money. Governments borrow it. J.P. Morgan lent billions to finance World War I, then collected interest for decades. When you control the money, you control who fights and who wins. Lockheed's predecessors. Military aviation started as an experiment in World War I. By World War II, it was decisive. The companies that built those first planes are still building them today, charging $1.7 trillion for a single fighter jet program. Halliburton. Somebody has to build the bases, pave the runways, feed the troops. Halliburton turned military logistics into an empire, billing the government for meals never served and fuel never delivered. Cost plus contracts meant they profited from waste. This isn't speculation. These are documented contracts, public financial records, congressional testimonies. The paper trail is undeniable. Let's start with the family that wrote the playbook. Éleuthère DuPont arrived in America from France in 1800. He was a trained chemist who'd worked in French powder mills, and he recognized something most immigrants didn't. America had just fought a revolution and was expanding west. That meant constant demand for explosives, not just for war, for mining, for clearing land, for building a nation, but especially for war. In 1802, DuPont founded his company on the Brandywine River in Delaware. The location wasn't accidental, close enough to Philadelphia and Washington for government access, water power for the mills, far enough from population centers that when accidents happened, nobody important died. The War of 1812 brought DuPont's first major military contract. They supplied gunpowder to the U.S. Army and established a pattern that would repeat for 2 centuries. War breaks out. Government needs explosives immediately. DuPont already has production capacity. They get the contract. They scale up. They make enormous profits. War ends. They keep the infrastructure and wait for the next one. The Mexican-American War in 1846 cemented their position. The contract was worth $1 million, roughly $35 million in today's money. But the real value wasn't the profit. It was becoming the government's preferred supplier. When you delivered in the last war, you're first in line for the next. Then came the Civil War. 4 years of industrial-scale slaughter. The Union Army needed gunpowder on a scale never seen before. DuPont's mills ran 24 hours a day, producing over 4 million pounds. The contracts totaled more than $10 million, equivalent to $300 million today. Here's where it gets interesting. The DuPont family were Northern Democrats who opposed abolition. Some family members privately supported the Confederacy, but they sold exclusively to the Union because that's where the money was. After the war, when the Union won, DuPont positioned itself as a patriotic company that helped save the nation. The complexity of their actual politics was conveniently forgotten. Only the profit remained. But nothing prepared DuPont for World War I. Before America entered the war in 1917, DuPont was already selling explosives to Britain and France. Millions of pounds of gunpowder, TNT, smokeless powder. When America joined, production went exponential. DuPont supplied 40% of all explosives used by Allied forces. They built new plants, hired thousands of workers. The profits were staggering. In 1914, DuPont's net earnings were $5 million. By 1918, they hit $82 million. That's over $1.6 billion in today's money. A 1,600% increase in 4 years. And here's the critical move. After the war, they didn't return that money. They diversified into chemicals, plastics, synthetic materials. They used war profits to build a peacetime empire. Teflon, nylon, Kevlar. All funded by explosives, but they never stopped selling to the military. World War II brought another surge. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. Every conflict, DuPont or its spin-offs supplied materials. Today, 6 generations removed from Éleuthère, the DuPont family trust is worth an estimated $30 billion, 2 centuries of compounding war profits. Now let's talk about the resource every modern military needs and the family that monopolized it for a century. John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil in 1870. By 1880, he controlled 90% of America's oil refining. This wasn't a business, it was a monopoly. And when America went to war, that monopoly became a strategic weapon. The Spanish-American War in 1898 was small, but it taught Rockefeller a valuable lesson. The U.S. Navy was transitioning from coal to oil. Naval vessels needed fuel oil. The war lasted only months, but it established petroleum as a military necessity. Rockefeller's takeaway: control the fuel, control the military. World War I was the first industrial war where oil determined victory. Tanks, trucks, airplanes, ships all required petroleum products. Standard Oil, though broken up by antitrust action in 1911, still dominated through successor companies. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, all Rockefeller controlled. They supplied fuel to the U.S. military and the Allies. The contracts were worth hundreds of millions. But here's where the Rockefeller strategy differed from DuPont's. They didn't just sell to one side. Standard Oil's German subsidiary sold fuel to Germany. Even after America entered the war, Rockefeller companies traded with Germany through neutral countries. This wasn't treason under the law, it was business. The companies were technically separate legal entities. Profit from both sides turned the Rockefellers into the wealthiest family in America. John D. became the world's first billionaire. World War II saw an even darker pattern. Standard Oil of New Jersey, Exxon's predecessor, was investigated for trading with Nazi Germany through subsidiaries. They'd shared patents for synthetic rubber with IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate. This gave Germany technology that prolonged the war. Senator Harry Truman, before he was president, led the investigation. His committee concluded that Standard Oil's actions had damaged the Allied war effort, but no one was prosecuted. The company was too important. The military needed their fuel. So the investigation was quietly shelved, and the contracts continued. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. Every conflict required oil. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, the Rockefeller successor companies, supplied it. By the 1970s, the family began divesting from oil to avoid political scrutiny, but the wealth remained. The Rockefeller family fortune today is estimated at $11 billion, built on petroleum burned by armies fighting wars. Weapons and fuel win battles, but money finances wars, and the people who lend that money profit regardless of who wins. J.P. Morgan founded his banking empire in the 1870s. By 1900, J.P. Morgan and Company was the most powerful bank in America. Morgan understood something that would define a century of war profits. Governments at war will borrow at any rate. They have no choice. The alternative is losing. The Spanish-American War in 1898 was financed partly through Morgan loans. Small war, small loans. But it established the relationship. World War I was different. When war broke out in Europe in 1914, America was officially neutral. But American banks, led by J.P. Morgan, lent over $2 billion to Britain and France between 1914 and 1917. That's over $50 billion today. The loans were used to buy weapons, food, supplies, much of it from American companies. So American banks lent money to allies, who spent it buying from American companies. The money circulated, but the profits stuck to both ends. Here's the critical detail. Those loans made American neutrality impossible. By 1917, Britain and France owed so much to American banks that their defeat would have triggered a financial crisis in the United States. If they lost the war, they couldn't repay. American banks would collapse, the economy would crater. So when President Wilson asked Congress to declare war in April 1917, it wasn't just about democracy or German aggression. It was about protecting American financial interests. Senator George Norris of Nebraska said it explicitly during the war declaration debate. We are going into war upon the command of gold. We are about to put the dollar sign on the American flag. He voted against the war. Congress voted for it, and J.P. Morgan's loans were secured by American military power. After the war, Morgan profited again. Germany owed reparations to the Allies. The Allies owed money to America. Morgan arranged the loans that let Germany pay reparations, which the Allies used to repay American loans. Morgan collected fees at every step. The Dawes Plan in 1924 and the Young Plan in 1929, both structured by Morgan bankers, refinanced billions in war debt. Morgan collected millions in fees. World War II followed the same pattern. Before Pearl Harbor, Morgan banks financed British war purchases. After America entered, the U.S. government borrowed heavily. War bonds, Treasury securities, Morgan banks underwrote them, collecting fees on every issuance. The Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe, was administered partly through Morgan-connected institutions. The Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, every conflict required financing. Morgan banks, by then merged into J.P. Morgan Chase, were always involved. The Morgan family is no longer involved in day-to-day banking, but the wealth remains. Family fortune estimated at $30 billion, built on lending money for wars and collecting interest while soldiers died repaying the cost. Military aviation has been profitable since World War I. The companies that built the first warplanes are still building them today, and they've perfected the art of the cost overrun. The Lockheed brothers, later spelled Lockheed, founded their aircraft company in 1912. By World War I, they were building planes for the military, small contracts, experimental designs, but they recognized that aviation was the future. World War I saw limited use of aircraft, reconnaissance mostly, some bombing, but the potential was clear. After the war, military aviation contracts dried up. Many aircraft companies went bankrupt. Lockheed survived by building civilian planes, but they kept their military connections alive. World War II was the breakthrough. Aircraft were decisive. Bombers, fighters, transports, all essential. Lockheed built the P-38 Lightning fighter, over 10,000 produced. The Hudson bomber, over 2,800 produced, contracts worth hundreds of millions. But here's the Lockheed innovation. They didn't just build planes. They built relationships with the Pentagon. They hired former military officers as executives. They located factories in congressional districts where representatives needed jobs for constituents. They made themselves politically untouchable. After World War II, the Cold War kept contracts flowing. Lockheed built the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, the C-130 cargo plane, still in use today. Every decade brought new contracts. And Lockheed's strategy was always the same. Build good enough products, underestimate costs, get the contract, then come back for more money because the project is more complex than expected. The Pentagon always paid. Why? Because canceling the project meant admitting waste. The C-5 Galaxy transport plane is the perfect example. Initial contract in 1965, $2.1 billion. Actual cost by delivery, $5.3 billion, 150% over budget. Did Lockheed lose money? No. Cost plus contract. They got paid all costs plus profit. The Pentagon couldn't cancel because they'd already spent billions, so they paid. Lockheed profited. Congress approved it because the factory employed thousands in Georgia. Vietnam, Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, every conflict brought Lockheed contracts. By the 1990s, the military-industrial complex was consolidating. Lockheed merged with Martin Marietta in 1995 to become Lockheed Martin. Today, they're the largest defense contractor in the world, $65 billion in revenue in 2023, 90% from government contracts. And the pattern continues. The F-35 fighter jet is the most expensive weapons program in history. Original budget, $233 billion. Current estimate, over $1.7 trillion. That's trillion with a T, 7 times over budget. And Lockheed is getting paid. Every cost overrun, the Pentagon covers. Why? Too much invested. Too many jobs at stake. Too many congressional districts dependent on the program. Somebody has to build the bases, pave the runways, feed the troops. Halliburton turned military logistics into an art form, founded in 1919 by Earl Halliburton as an oil services company. But the founder understood that infrastructure, whether for oil or military, was lucrative. By World War II, Halliburton was building bases, airfields, ports for the military. The pattern was simple. Military needs infrastructure fast. Halliburton has the expertise and equipment. They get no-bid contracts because there's no time for competitive bidding. They build the facility. Cost plus contract means they get paid all expenses plus guaranteed profit. They can't lose money. Korea saw Halliburton build bases and infrastructure. Vietnam was bigger. Halliburton, through its subsidiary Brown & Root, built roads, ports, airfields throughout South Vietnam. Contracts worth billions, awarded without competitive bidding. Why? Political connections. George Brown, founder of Brown & Root, was a major donor to Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson's political career was partly funded by Brown. When Johnson became president, Brown & Root got massive contracts for Vietnam infrastructure. The Gulf War in 1991 brought Halliburton back. Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense. Halliburton got contracts to build facilities in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. After the war, Cheney left government and became CEO of Halliburton in 1995. He ran the company until 2000, when he became vice president under George W. Bush. Then came Iraq and Afghanistan. Halliburton, through its subsidiary KBR, got contracts worth over $40 billion. No-bid contracts, cost plus pricing. They built bases, provided food services, supplied fuel, managed logistics. The costs were astronomical. The Pentagon Inspector General found billions in waste and overcharges. Halliburton billed the government for meals never served, fuel deliveries that never happened, construction never completed. When questioned, Halliburton argued that war zones are chaotic and some waste is inevitable. The government agreed and kept paying. Dick Cheney, as vice president, recused himself from contract decisions involving Halliburton. But his former company got more contracts during his tenure than in any previous period. From 2003 to 2008, Halliburton's government contracts increased 400%. Stock price tripled. When Cheney left office in 2009, he still held Halliburton stock options worth millions. This is the pattern. Company hires politicians as executives. Those executives build relationships in government. When wars start, those relationships turn into contracts. Politicians retire wealthy. Companies get richer. Taxpayers pay the bill. It's not just that these families profited from war, it's how they profited. The same strategy, repeated for 150 years. Step 1. Position before the war. All 5 companies established themselves as essential before conflict began. DuPont built explosive manufacturing capacity during peacetime. Rockefeller monopolized oil refining. Morgan built banking relationships. Lockheed maintained military contracts between wars. Halliburton built infrastructure expertise. When war started, they were ready. Competitors weren't. Step 2. Get the first contract. Government needs supplies immediately. No time for competitive bidding. The company's already positioned to get no-bid contracts. Justification is always national security. Once you have the first contract, the next ones are easier. You're the proven supplier. Step 3. Cost plus pricing. Almost every major war contract from the Civil War onward was cost plus. The contractor bills the government for all costs, plus a guaranteed percentage profit. This removes all risk. If costs overrun, the government pays. If the project takes longer, the contractor makes more profit. The incentive is to maximize costs, not minimize them. Step 4. Overrun the budget. Every single major weapon system in the last 50 years has come in over budget. F-35, 7 times over. Zumwalt destroyer, 3 times over. Littoral combat ship, double. This isn't incompetence, it's the business model. Underbid to get the contract, then revise estimates upward. The government can't cancel because they've already invested, so they pay. And the contractor profits from the overrun. Step 5. Hire the regulators. When military officers retire, where do they go? Defense contractors. Generals who approved Lockheed contracts become Lockheed executives. Admirals who oversaw shipbuilding join shipbuilding companies. The revolving door between Pentagon and industry is so established it has a name. And it ensures that the people awarding contracts maintain relationships that benefit them later. Step 6. Lobby for more. War defense contractors spend millions lobbying Congress. They donate to campaigns. They fund think tanks that produce papers advocating military intervention. The Center for Strategic and International Studies. The American Enterprise Institute. Both received funding from defense contractors. Both consistently published research supporting military action. When Iraq was being debated in 2002, defense contractors funded organizations that produced intelligence reports supporting invasion. They paid for advertisements. They hired former generals to appear on news shows advocating war. When war was approved, those same contractors got billions in contracts. Did they create the Iraq War? No, but they created an environment where war was more likely, and they profited when it happened. Step 7. Diversify the profit. War profits don't stay in weapons. DuPont used explosive profits to build a chemical empire. Rockefeller used oil profits to buy banks and real estate. Morgan used war lending profits to finance peacetime industries. The companies diversify so that even when wars end, the wealth remains. And the families behind these companies become dynasties, multi-generational wealth built on war. How much profit are we talking about? DuPont's total revenue from military contracts since 1802, estimated over $50 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars. Rockefeller companies, over $100 billion in fuel sales to military since 1898. Morgan Banks, interest and fees from war financing estimated at over $75 billion. Lockheed Martin and predecessors, over $200 billion in aircraft and systems since 1917. Halliburton, over $60 billion in logistics and infrastructure since 1942. Total, these 5 companies have extracted over $485 billion from American taxpayers through war contracts. That's documented, publicly available, contract values. It doesn't include indirect profits, stock price increases, real estate bought with war profits, industries built using war capital. If you include that, the number exceeds $1 trillion. And here's the critical detail. That money came from taxpayers. Every dollar paid to DuPont for explosives was taken from American workers through taxes. Every dollar paid to Halliburton for logistics came from deficit spending that future generations will repay. These aren't normal business profits. These are public funds transferred to private hands, justified by war. Is this still happening? Yes. Right now. 2023, U.S. military budget was $816 billion. The 5 largest defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, received over $200 billion in contracts. That's 25% of the entire defense budget going to 5 companies. The pattern continues. These companies employ former Pentagon officials. They lobby Congress. They locate factories strategically. The F-35 program, built by Lockheed, has suppliers in 45 states. That's intentional. It means 90 senators have constituents employed by the program. Voting against the F-35 means voting against jobs in your state. So Congress keeps funding it, even though it's 7 times over budget, even though it's years behind schedule, even though it has over 800 documented defects. The pattern established by DuPont in 1802 continues today. War is profitable for companies, for shareholders, for executives, for politicians who get donations and jobs after retirement. The only people who don't profit are the soldiers who fight and the taxpayers who pay. What could America have built with $485 billion if it hadn't gone to war profits? $485 billion could fund free college for every American student for 20 years. It could build high-speed rail connecting every major city. It could fund universal health care for a decade. It could rebuild every bridge and road in the country. It could fund cancer research for a century. But instead, it bought explosives, fuel, weapons, and logistics for wars, some necessary, many not. This isn't about whether wars were justified. World War II was necessary. But even necessary wars were exploited for profit. And many wars were encouraged, prolonged, or escalated because it was profitable. Vietnam could have ended years earlier, but defense contractors lobbied to continue. Iraq was sold on false intelligence, partly produced by contractor-funded think tanks. Afghanistan became a 20-year occupation, partly because contractors made billions rebuilding what we destroyed. The profit motive didn't create these wars, but it made them longer and more expensive than they needed to be. Despite evidence of overcharging, fraud, profiteering, no one goes to jail. DuPont was investigated for explosive monopoly practices in the 1930s. Nothing happened. Standard Oil was broken up for monopoly, but the Rockefellers kept the wealth. The companies reunited over time. Morgan banks were investigated for war profiteering after World War I. No prosecutions. Halliburton was investigated for overcharging in Iraq. They paid a fine, kept the contracts, continued profiting. Lockheed was investigated for bribing foreign officials to buy weapons. They paid a fine. No executives faced jail time. The pattern is consistent. Investigations find wrongdoing. Fines are paid. The fines are a fraction of the profits. No individuals are prosecuted. The companies continue operating. Why? Because these companies are too important to prosecute. The military depends on them. Congress depends on them for jobs in districts. The economy depends on them. So they're protected, even when they break the law. 5 families, 5 companies, 150 years. Every major American war. The pattern is identical every time. Position before the war, get the contracts, overrun the costs, hire the regulators, lobby for more, profit while others die. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. The contracts are public, the profits are recorded. The pattern is undeniable, and it's still happening right now. The only question is whether anyone will stop it. History says they won't, because the companies are too powerful, the politicians are too dependent, the public is too distracted to care. If this changed how you see military spending, if you finally understand that war is a business model, then you're starting to see the pattern. 5 families, billions in profit, built on wars that killed millions. Subscribe if you want to understand how power actually works, because they're not going to teach you this in school. They're going to teach you that these companies are patriotic, that they serve the nation, that war profiteering is a conspiracy theory. But the contracts are public record, and the pattern has repeated for 150 years. 5 families, every war, same result. They profit, we pay, and soldiers die.